I've had a really good time already, but Nate, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody, and then we'll jump into this conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks so much for having me on, Ben. Super glad to be here. My name is Nate Gauthier. I'm a local Roundnet organizer based in Sacramento, California, mostly. Um, I started really my exposure to the competitive scene when I started my education at Tufts University. I was in the Boston area for about a year and was fortunate enough to have a run-in with the beloved Jonas Willinger of the Roundnet community. When I was a freshman at Tufts, I got the opportunity to play some pickup with Jonah, and he really introduced me to what competitive Roundnet was and what the college Roundnet scene looked like, and just all of these different really fascinating facets about this sport that I really had no information of going into. And fast forward 2 years now, I'm back in Sacramento taking care of some things, but in the meantime, I'm also setting some time aside to help develop the scene here, both competitive and recreationally, and really just sort of establish a hub for players to come and travel and to get some insight into what it means to be a developing Roundnet community. I'm just really excited to be here. Really excited to talk to you about what it looks like for the future of the sport moving forward, and what we can do to really help encourage people to get involved at any level.
Yeah, well, I love the background. I'm glad also that you kind of lay out very clearly. There's this kind of two main tracks you're focused on. You're focused on your own skill and development, which is something I think everybody can relate to, and whether it's playing around it or anything else. And then the other side of it is building up the local community. I'm curious, for you and your experience, have you found benefits yet? And if not, like, do you plan to in the development of your community, improving your own competitive drive? I know, like, if you don't have anybody to play locally, you only can really serve or hit against a wall.
Yeah, that's a really good point, honestly, because I feel like um, a real a real conflict of interest that we tend to have in the round net community, at least on the competitive side, is you have these impactful players that are, known to be a local in one specific area, and those players tend to have a trade-off when it comes to the people that they compete with. I think you really summarized that very nicely. But if you're a competitive round net player who's looking to develop your game, I feel like the sort of the real solution to your problem is always going to be to find people that are better than you, to challenge your game, challenge the way that you play, and to give you advice and perspective. And I absolutely agree with that. I think there is real value in finding people that are of a relatively higher skill level or baseline than you are. And I did do a lot of that myself, I would say, before I really kind of founded this community. There's a lot of great communities in nearby areas. University of Nevada, Reno has a great squad that I go up with and play all the time out there. Jack Stinson and all of those guys. It's a really great group. And I do want to emphasize that I think there's no reason to undercut the value of having competitive people in your area that are passionate about developing their game. But I will say, as someone who has been developing a community with a lot of, players that are completely new to the sport of roundnet, I've actually found a lot of benefit in just my overall fundamentals as a player. When you're teaching new players the game, or the sport of roundnet, I should say, you're really introducing to them a variety of different skills, right? Like I think what I'm so fascinated about roundnet, or what fascinates me so much about roundnet and the sport, is the fact that there are so many facets of skills within it that you can really perfect and hone, and to give everybody the opportunity to learn the basic fundamentals of what it means to hit a serve from 7 feet, to pull the ball, to set the ball, centered over the net. It's a really rewarding experience in the sense that, I feel really fulfilled in getting to share my love for the sport with people, and, being able to really share the skills that I have learned and accumulated as I have continued to grow as a player. But I think from a competitive standpoint, you're really allowing yourself to build a lot of foundation on your fundamentals as you're teaching these people these things. I found that as I was teaching people how to set and how to serve receive, because I really ran into this skill issue when I was starting out in this community. I had a lot of players who had never seen a cut serve before and were just getting aced left and right. And one of the very first things that I got to do as a Roundnet organizer in my community was teach them how to cheat my righty cut. And it sounds very insignificant and very small when you say it out loud like that. But I do think it is, there's something so valuable about teaching something else to another person. I think it really allows you to review the fundamentals of your own game and really reflect on things that you potentially may do wrong in your own conduct as a player while you're teaching people these things. As a local Roundnet organizer, you're going to find yourself kind of feeling like you're constantly playing below the level that you're at. That's something that I found as I was really developing the game. Um, but I don't think that that should be a discouraging aspect of being a Roundnet organizer. I feel, and this is an opinion that I hold that I think really could hold some bias here, but I feel like there are a lot of competitive players who shun people that are being introduced to the sport simply because they believe that they cannot compete with them at that level. And my response to that would be, well, they can't compete with you currently, but give them 2 to 3 months, and you will now have a net full of players that are able to receive your serves, have fundamentals that allow you to play the game at a somewhat competitive level. And just witnessing that and seeing how that really occurred within my own community, I just feel like, there's no reason to deny new people the opportunity to have competitive exposure to the sport. I completely understand that, players who are looking to compete in Premier at the top level may want, some semblance of, they may want some semblance of skill when they're trying to, practice their serves and practice their putaways. And I completely understand that. But I would also argue that as a sport that is a niche community to begin with, the more times that you find opportunities to exclude people from the sport, the more times you are failing to provide opportunities for the sport to grow.
There's a lot of good tracks are going on there. The last one being kind of the broad sense that the sport's really small, and so if it's like not like breaking your back to grow the sport in a small way and make it a thing that other people would want to be a part of, probably net positive seems safe. I'm actually super curious, not about getting more people to play. I think lots of people can get more people playing, but getting more people wanting to grow competitively. I'm curious what kind of conversation you have with people at your pickups. I probably will borrow it when you're saying, hey, you need to cheat this cut. What's the relationship you're building? Or what's kind of the like pitch you're getting to people to even come out to local pickups? If they aren't competitive, if they aren't skilled, maybe they've played other sports that would attract them to want to get on the grind, because ultimately that's the strength of local communities is not just how many people you have, not how many good people you have, but how many people I think you can set in motion to grow as players, whether they're absolute beginners or they're high level pros. The more people you have improving, and the culture of like making it okay to improve for the newbies, I think is like a really good asset. So how are you getting people in motion there?
Yeah, that's a great question, honestly. I think, you know, when you're introducing someone to a sport, there's always a competitive drive there to some extent, right? You may not want to come to a pickup because you want to be the next best premier player, but if you come to a pickup, you probably want to win some games because we all have that competitive drive in us to have, some sort of sense of,
Sure.
you know, it, some sort of sense of mediocrity
So yeah, what's
in
the pitch?
whatever we're
What's the pitch
doing.
to that person to come out? Or are you just putting out? Are you playing in public spaces and saying, "Come join us"? Or are you putting out online, "Hey, come play competitively with us"? What's the pitch for Sacramento group at least?
Yeah, I think it's a both and, honestly. I'm never turning down players that want to come to pick up, but I think there are a lot of players that come to pick up that, at least for me, myself and Harding are both, I would say, the established sort of skilled players in the Sacramento area at the moment. And when new people come to pickups, there is this weird thing that happens sometimes where people will want to come just to play you or beat you. And I actually find a lot of value in that. And I think that's a really great opportunity because if I can have someone come to a pickup and tell me, yeah, I want to play you today. Yes, I may like beat that person, 21-4 because I, have figured out how to hit a cut serve and a reverse serve. But what I find really valuable in that is that in almost every game that I play, especially with new people, especially with people that are still learning the rules and learning, the competitive scene, I'm always telling them ways to beat me as a player. Because for someone like me, as a round net athlete, or as someone who considers themselves a round net athlete, wins and losses and pickup to me are very much irrelevant to the overall aspect of my game. When I go to pickups, I'm focusing on specific skills that I'm trying to hone in. So when I have someone that comes to pick up for the first time that doesn't really know the rules but is super competitive and wants to play and sees me or Harding make a cool diving pull or something over the net, it's like there is a lot of opportunity there to get someone engaged, even if it means them trying to beat you. I don't think that we have to connotate that as something negative. I think there's actually a lot of value in me encouraging people who show up to say, yeah, you should try to beat me. You should try to find ways to beat me. And I'm going to give you the skill set and, all of the tips that I can to help you try to beat me in pickup games. And I think that is a short-term solution. But I think what ends up happening in those instances is you have so many people who come back who want to continue to compete, and then they fall in love with the sport and the community. And so, at least for me, when I'm, really trying to organize pickups and just rope, as many people in as possible, I think as a local roundnet organizer, you should always be trying to just get as many numbers as physically possible to your pickups. I completely understand what you're saying about, there always being the opportunity for more people to come to pick up. I do think that as I continue to encourage more people to come and to play and to compete, there is constantly more opportunities for me to give them tips, lessons, drills, whatever knowledge that I have about RoundNet, whatever I can sort of share with them. The more that I see engagement at every single level. So I think the best way for me to sort of summarize this is to give you a prime anecdotal example of a player that I have in Sacramento. So there's a girl who is recently getting into the competitive scene. This is actually going to be her first year traveling to tournaments within the SCS. But she's been coming to pick up for, I want to say, at least a year and a half now. We've always done really sporadic things in the area, but over the last 6 to 8 months or so, I've really kind of vamped up the structure of what we're doing in Sacramento. But I vividly remember when we first really started playing somewhat competitive pickup, where we were having 2 nets and people were, marking their own balls and bringing their lines and their paint and really kind of just implementing as much of the competitive aspect of the game as possible. Mm-hmm. I kept seeing text messages from that girl or just constant questions from her asking me oh, what should I have done there in this instance to get that ball? Or, hey, your righty cut, beat me to your right there. I really don't know how, what I could have done differently to receive that serve. Is there something is there some sort of advice that you can give me to help me with that? I really want to play and I really want to continue to get better. And it was as we built on that conversation, it slowly sort of morphed into a larger conversation about, okay, I really am starting to get a feel for the sport and, my fundamentals as a player. What does it look like to play this competitively? Are there tournaments? Are there things that I can go to travel to? And I feel like when you reach that tipping point with someone where they're really starting to get curious about things like tournaments, that's where, at least for me, I find the most excitement. I find the most value in getting my players out to pickups and getting them excited about what's coming up. They're not only are they able to practice their game and improve and get as much feedback from me as I can possibly give, they're also getting the opportunity to be introduced to competitive events, competitive tournaments.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good head to bring this wrinkle of I mean, you and me we love growing the local communities, but no one's looking to us to win any big tournaments. For you, what's the trade-off between this competitive player who wants to travel and be successful, but also they could be really helpful for people like you and me who are only so good at RoundNet in helping grow the local players?
I think that, the real trade-off between the competitive round net player that wants to spend all of this money to go to tournaments, wants to, spend all of this money on travel to, kind of develop their game, which is something that I am completely guilty of. I'll be honest. Like, I really love what I do here in Sacramento, but currently, like, my aspirations for the sport are for me to try to play at the top level, and that's something that I am really aspiring to do. So I have constantly had this, let's call it trade-off of how do I, as someone who cares about the sport and wants to see the sport move forward, allow myself to develop my own game, but in a way that allows other people to also benefit from my development. And I think that is a real issue that I find in the roundnet community currently. It seems as though a lot of the training that one does as a roundnet player is very individual based. And I feel like that's a much broader conversation for us to have. But I do
Yeah,
think it is important to recognize that, when we're talking about post-COVID era roundnet and, all of this like serve ball and all of these, terms that have really come up since 2020, I feel like there is a lot more individualized progress that is prioritized as a competitive roundnet player. Kind of like you said, hitting in your basement, hitting against a wall, setting against a wall. And I think that people tend to forget that as you're building up new players that are of a lower skill level, there are challenges that come within that, but there's also challenges to your own competitive game that I think are very valuable. Like the prime example for me that I always sort of bring up to people when I'm talking about communities is, you know, new players are not going to get great touches on the ball ever, especially as they're learning hand-eye coordination and becoming more comfortable with the feel of the spike ball. But that just means that you get more opportunities to work on your off-net setting because now you're
absolutely.
allowing yourself to be challenged in
I
new
think I
ways.
could I
And
think I could cover the benefits of playing with worse players from a training
yeah,
perspective. Maybe not from a competitive
100%.
like tournament perspective at length. But yeah, I think the big gap, like you mentioned, is also just like the not the mismatch, but just the different incentives that we at least have right now. So in our minds, when we start playing around it, and you've mentioned it for yourself too, you want to just achieve this like individual personal success. And that's what we have in our minds is like I want to be successful as an individual player. That's my goal. And maybe there's some incentive for you to want this local community, maybe that you can train off of to help you be better, but there aren't necessarily incentives um, for your community to necessarily be better around it. Other than, I don't know, maybe you can save gas on driving to play pickup that's at a high level. So like trying to tie as many of those individual incentives back to being better for the community comes back to um, in some ways like if you're the local pro local star of your community, trying to find ways for that community to reward you or retain you, I think, so that
Mm,
you have to get something out of it to not want to travel all the time. So I know
yeah,
for me, like wanting to, whether it's outright pay players or like find like reasons for them to train up players like through clinics and things like that is kind of the pathways I've thought through. I don't know if there's whether it's for you or for other people locally, if you've thought through other ways you'd want to attack that, or if you've like broader ideas that you'd want to go about adding more
yeah,
incentive adding more incentives to building community, right? Like nobody will disagree with us that spending time growing community is important for growing the sport, but we just all admit that there's also like limited incentives or limited resources to pour towards it. um, so if you had resources to pour towards it, where would you use them?
yeah. Honestly, I think, in an ideal world where we're not scarce of resources and we can really find pockets to invest in, the like sport that I always like to talk about a lot when I talk to players about, sports that really prioritize community development, oddly enough, is golf.
Okay.
Um, and I say that because when I think about, you mentioned local pros, and I think this is why I kind of made that connection in my mind. I really love the system that they have set up, and I don't know all the details of this to the exact
It's
to
okay.
the exact
I
point.
can only
But
speak to disc golf to a level, so you've got
uh,
regular golf covered.
yeah, but to my general understanding, there's a system in place where local pros are compensated for the lessons that they give to players at their local club. And I think obviously, money is always going to be the biggest factor in this. But I think if you can find a system where players are financially compensated for doing what they love, but also doing what they love in an environment and in a community where RoundNet is the main focus and the development of RoundNet is the main focus of what you're doing, I think something modeled after a structure like that would be incredibly successful because
Mhm.
I don't think that all of the players that you see competing at the top level don't want to see this sport continue to grow. I feel like everybody has a very similar mindset as a competitive roundnet player about where they want to see this sport in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But the real drawback that you constantly get is, okay, well, from a logistical financial perspective, how can I make that work? I run into so many of those barriers on my own, just to be completely transparent here. Like I'm 21 years old, fully financially independent, and I'm working a job that's 40 hours a week to cover my bills. So it's
Yeah.
like, you have to find currently within the system that we have, you have to find time outside of your current practice to really,
Mhm.
you know, allow RoundNet to grow or to prioritize RoundNet growth in that way. It's always sort of whether you like it or not, it is a hobby because it's constantly
I think
sidelined
that's an important thing
compared
that
to
we try
compared
to
to other
remind ourselves of
priorities.
is like we're all hobbyists in this. Like obviously
Yes, yes,
there's a little bit of money, and I say a little bit because there's not that much. There's only so many employees I think that are working on RoundNet full time. You could probably think of them if you're thinking about this conversation. But yeah, for the players, the other like really big trade off or tricky thing is um, they know the value in growing and supporting communities, and at the same time, because of how quickly the sport changes and evolves right now, because it's so young and small, you can't as a higher level player, right? If you are one of them, you can't fall behind the meta of keeping up with seeing serves, seeing serve receives, playing, getting reps, getting touches at a high level. So if you skip a month, if you skip that big tournament because you wanted to stay home and work on your community, you lose a step. And if you want to lose 2 steps, all of a sudden, not only are you not able to keep up at a high level, you maybe are like fully giving up that opportunity to be a high level player. So not that it really is this or that, but in some ways it can very quickly become something you have to choose between of being a really high level player or being a local community supporter. Given again, we're creeping this into my final exam studies or my job or some combination thereof. Um, there's very very limited time that we actually can put into round it. So um, even just spending the time thinking about how we should put it into round is like I always joke is questionable. Like shouldn't we just be like running a pickup right now? instead of talking about running pickups. Um,
yeah. I do want to touch on one more thing that you mentioned at the end there, just about like sort of the growth of the meta and how people are constantly, trying to keep up with, the new meta of competitive roundnet. I think it's a great point that, you know, the more time that you spend away from the competitive scene, the more that your game immediately tanks, whether you like it or not. However, I think you kind of touched on this when you mentioned, hosting local tournaments and things like that. But yeah, I would say that my minor contention to that point would be that the more that we can find opportunities to engage in competitive play at the smallest of smallest levels within these very small roundnet hubs, the more that we can develop the meta in in whatever direction. I do believe that currently tournaments are the biggest source of that competitive play, but I don't necessarily think that that is an infinite problem that we will have to constantly face. I think it is a large problem that we are really seeing the effects of currently because there's so many communities that are trying to really sort of build up this reputation as a hub. But I do think that there is a future in which local roundnet organizations and their investment into the competitive scene and their development of these clubs like the club systems that we see in Europe, which whole other conversation. But I think that is a really great
we'll have
example
to
of
do a
that.
part
Of
two.
Yeah, of just, ways in which Roundnet can be structured in a legitimate way. You look at the Bundesliga in Germany, and it's like, at least for me, I look at that and I go, that looks like a legit sports league. If you were to show that to somebody who has never seen Roundnet before, and they see these highlights of Roundnet Germany with the logo and all of these different clips and these people in jerseys, they would probably think it's a legitimate sport. And I feel as though, you know, because they're so successful in Europe with that investment into local clubs, in my head, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's like, if they're being so great with it, why shouldn't we continue to do the same success here? And what I think the real drawback to that is our own our sort of own cultural issues when it comes to developing like rec sports and club sports, which again, another tangent. But I do feel as though the United States specifically has a lot of opportunity for us to continue to allow us to develop local roundnet organizations in a way where players feel like they're a part of something. I think that's what we find to be the real disconnect right now, and what organizations like ASL I think are doing to kind of bridge that gap. You really want to try to give people a space where they feel like they belong in the roundnet community. That sense of belonging is, I think, very subjective right now, in the sense that you can find where you belong at tournaments, or you can find where you belong with your local crew that maybe plays pickup once a week. But at the end of the day, we have not developed a system in which any one person, regardless of their sports background, regardless of their interest in roundnet, can just show up to a pickup and be immediately interested and invested in the sport. Like, we're constantly taking extra steps to try to get people to come to our sport, because we understand that there are some things that are fundamentally broken about it. And it's like, to me, it feels like, because we're doing that, or like, since we are like kind of doing this, beat around the bush of like, oh, roundnet's a great sport, but it has a couple of issues, but it's still really cool and you should join it. It's like, if we're doing that as a community collectively, we are already in a poor place. I feel like
I know you mentioned like ASL is trying to like develop that ecosystem, and I think like I know for like the US community, there's like all these different entities. USA Rounded is obviously like something I volunteer with, and also trying to connect all the dots as best we can. But yeah, the challenge I think ultimately is, it comes back to the kind of person that we I think have playing. We're mostly for the most part not listening to these conversations, not engaging in these conversations. We're mostly just wanting to be the best. And so at the scale we're at right now, like, we don't have the resources for it to be easy to bring people in clearly. So yeah, like you said, there's all this extra work and confusion. I don't know. I actually don't think you need to worry about all of this, I'll call it baggage, for trying to like make the sport like well thought out and sustainable and like the most fun to watch to get people in. I think you can get people to start playing, especially because at a beginner level, it's generally more exciting anyway, and more rally happy. So I'm impressed that I think it sounds like you get a lot of people like up to speed in your community about the broader like structures of the sport and the challenges that it faces, which is super fascinating. Just that you've got like that many curious minds coming to pick up. But I don't think you have to try to do that at the same time. I think you can just say, hey, like, come play and have fun, and that can be enough for people. And they can just belong to that group that just likes to have fun. They don't have to worry about the world around them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would gently contend that only
You
to
can
say
fiercely contend. That's I
I
want
think I
more of
would
that.
I think I would contend that only to say that I absolutely agree that, like, fundamentally, as a local roundnet organizer, engagement is always like the number one priority. You're always looking for engagement, and I do agree that talking about all of these heavy issues around these really like nuanced conversations around the roundnet community and its growth, it's not for everyone. I totally agree. However, I would say that as someone who happens to have a decent amount of knowledge about the roundnet community, just because of my own investment, I'm never going to turn down an opportunity to explain
That's fair.
what is going on in the roundnet community to someone,
Yeah.
if they are interested. And I think that is
Yeah,
not
in the
necessarily
same way that you
something that.
shouldn't force coaching on a new player if you're like, hey, like you
Yes,
really shouldn't be hitting it that way. If they seem to be having a good time, you don't want to burst someone's bubble. I guess that's how I think
absolutely.
about it. Yeah, I don't think we're bursting anyone's bubble here, but yeah,
No,
not
yeah,
no,
that is a good point though, because there is, like I was talking earlier about how I'm always encouraging people to try to beat me and, play me in my own game. But I also don't want to, in every single instance when I play a new player, be like, hey, you're not hitting the ball right. Hit the ball differently. You know, like there is some aggression that I think that comes with that. So there is very much a balance in, encouraging people to come out to the sport and
sure.
play. And yes, like, beat me. Yeah, I always say that. I don't know why. Like, I really do
Well,
just
if
have
that
this,
seems to be
like,
the thing that you find enjoyment at locally, like that makes perfect sense.
yeah,
So that's that if that is like the thing that's successful for you is people all ganging up on you, like that makes perfect sense, right? Like because if you lose a game, everybody gets like a collective win for like the community, even if they weren't on the net. But yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And in my mind, it's like, it's still, in some ways, it's still a collective win for me because, like, I'm constantly
sure,
developing various aspects of my own game when I get to play with people that, yeah, don't, like I said before, don't have the best touches or anything like that. But also, it constantly gives people motivation to come back to pickups. And I
yeah,
think that is really some something that is really unfortunate that happens at a lot of competitive pickups is someone shows up, they get destroyed by somebody who is much better than them, and then they no longer want to come back to pickup because they didn't have an enjoyable experience. And so I think as a local Roundnet organizer, the real balance should constantly be, is a new player having an enjoyable experience at my community, and also is, are there ways in which I can engage this player in the competitive scene that would be of value to them. And I think you constantly are walking that line as someone who is trying to structure pickup, because you never
mm.
want to discourage anyone from coming out to play, but at the end of the day, everybody has a different baseline skill level when they, come up to
And
whatever
what's
pickup you
more,
host.
everyone wants a different experience. Like some people don't want to play
100%.
with the
Yeah.
serving. Some people want to be competitive, but they don't want to play with the serving lines. So, um, yeah, the sport's so small. I think you said it really beautifully earlier. It's just like if you have an opportunity to exclude people and you're taking those, like just flip it around and make it a way to bring more people in. Um, even if they don't continue playing, it's just like a thing they think about positively. That they have if they have nice things to say about the pickup they went to. I guess it's like a newer community for y'all, but like for me, my favorite is seeing like one or two people that will come do one tournament a year. Say they had the most fun, the best day ever for like this very small casual like DC area tournament, and then I don't see them until like a tournament 10 to 16 months later, and then they're like, I had a great time again, so much fun, and I'm just wondering like, wow, like is it bad that they aren't coming back, or is it did like just take the win? You know, not everybody's going to be like a diehard roundnet person. That's totally okay.
Yeah. I think like it's like, it's honestly just a process of like self critique. At least for me, I feel like I'm constantly taking the small wins when I can. Oh, I have this player coming to pick up constantly now. That's awesome. But also, you know, I feel like, um, as a niche sport, we do have a tendency to be very comfortable in the sort of conduct and structure that we have currently. And so I feel like my message to anyone who's thinking about organizing pickup, organizing roundnet in your local area, you should always try to find ways to improve the experiences for everyone else in your community, but also be honest with yourself about what you are doing and how it is impacting both you and the people around you. Because I feel like roundnet burnout is something that people really don't talk about a whole lot in the community, but I feel like it's something that you really do experience very quickly if you are not
Yeah,
kind of allowing
I
yourself that
I
balance.
can
And
speak
like
from experience.
100%.
I
Yeah.
think you put it really like bluntly though. Just like you have to be able to like assess it really quickly and improve. So I appreciate you speaking to that. I'm curious
Yeah.
where just and I know we had to wrap up. Where can people find Nate and like the Sacramento crew if they're visiting town? I can definitely link it and stuff in the description of the video.
Yeah. So we have a few different social media platforms that we're kind of bouncing between. I have a Discord that I would love for you to link in your page. That we mostly utilize that for organizing pickups and things like that. Discord's a great platform for that. But we also do have an Instagram handle. It's just at sac.roundnet. If anybody wants to go and check us out, that's the main handle for the community Instagram. It's where we post most of our information about like upcoming pickups, clips from different tournaments, highlights. I'm kind of in the process right now of really starting to streamline some actual content from Sacramento, so stay tuned for that. Lots of mic'd up pickups and fun things
Love
like
that.
that coming soon,
Yeah,
hopefully.
it's hard doing all the
Um,
things we mentioned and then also being a social media manager. So I
yeah,
have
no,
a
that
lot of
is
kudos for that.
yeah, that's a learning curve for sure. I do have a good friend of mine in the community that is starting to help me out with some of that, but it's definitely a learning curve.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that one last thing, I'm gonna boost this just to say it. Content in RoundNet is like the more the better, the more the merrier. Uh, Especially if you're a local RoundNet organizer who's looking to try to bring people out. The one thing that people always do is look at their phones. So the more that you can try to just constantly post on Instagram, TikTok, I still don't think I do a great job of this as a RoundNet organizer because I'm juggling my job and whatever else. But like the more that you can constantly hound people on social media to come to your things, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, Nate and I are both looking for social media interns. That's for the Sacramento and Greater Washington area Roundnet
Yeah,
clubs. So,
yeah.
yeah,
The
I'll link all
finances
those,
we will discuss,
Yeah,
but
I'll link all those
yeah,
below. Yeah, yeah. Well, probably like free registrations.
oh yeah,
And all the good comp stuff is usually a nice starting
yes,
point. Yeah, I always try to find creative ways to pay people in a budding sport. Cool. Well, yeah. If you haven't already, definitely subscribe to this channel. You can share this conversation with a friend, and yeah, I definitely will get Nate to talk about at least like one of the 5 things he alluded to some other time soon. I know. Um, yeah, this is a pretty wide ranging conversation. But yeah, let us know if there's anything you want us to dig into in particular. Um, I have to go back and check timestamps on this. So thanks for watching, everybody, and Nate, thanks for jumping on here.
yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Ben. I'm super glad that we have people like you that are willing to do this and lay the groundwork to actually have real conversations about what we need for the sport. Thank you so much, man.
If you want to be part of pushing Roundnet forward with thoughtful conversations like this, follow me on Instagram, linked below. Really exciting announcement on a project I'm cooking up there, and I can't wait to be part of the conversation with you all. Peace.